We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to today's show. It is the Friday FARCast, and I apologize for my tardiness. Luckily, we've had a chat room open, and Erica, the hostess with the mostest, has been holding down fort there and keeping the discussion flowing. You know, it's been challenging with with the technology this morning. Been trying to reset for Friday. Okay, so let me do this. Let me just do this. Let me do this. Hold on one second. I'm going to play. I don't want to just play a piece of music. I just was awakened by something else. It was a phone call, and my phone got all screwed up. So let me do this. I'm going to try to set the stage for our guest, even though it's probably a little bit late today and running over. Let me just do this. Let me just send this out here. So it's going to be, hold on, 3, 4, 7, 308, 8995, 8995. Here we go. So we're doing that, and we're going to try and bring our guest on today, a filmmaker. She's done a film about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a Tibetan Rinpoche who changed the course of American spirituality in the 1970s when he fled from his native Tibet. And he's a very interesting figure in terms of how he popularized Tibetan Buddhism in this country. And the film it's called Crazy Wisdom, and Crazy Wisdom was a type of it was a type of teaching that Rinpoche advocated, and there's a website. It's called crazywisdom.com, and you can go check it out. He's a very compelling figure in the modern American sort of spiritual landscape. And let me just read you the director's statement of the film, just to give you kind of an idea. Johanna Dimitrakis is she's the director of Crazy Wisdom, and this is what she says. From the first seminar called The Battle of Ego in Los Angeles to filming his cremation on a cloudless but rainbow-filled day in Vermont, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche literally blew my mind. He always created a feeling of stark reality, compassion, and biting humor at the same time. I totally relate to that, by the way. Being in his presence was like being suddenly aware of an oncoming truck. It put every cell in your brain smack into the present moment. And in that moment, you could be outraged, moved to tears, or intellectually inspired, or all at once. This brilliant energy was difficult to resist, but exhausting to experience. On top of that, he lived an unapologetic life that challenged every one of us who crossed his path with fixed ideas about how a spiritual teacher should behave. He wore suits, spoke precise English, and lived like a bon vivant Westerner. So it took years of practice and study to understand that in the rich history of Tibetan Buddhism, his outrageous, crazy wisdom teaching style was just another tradition. In fact, it was impossible to separate his lifestyle, which was another tradition, from his teachings. He was living a life that was somehow utterly contemporary Western, controversial, and totally Tibetan as well. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get Johanna on because of the late time here. But I think we're going to, Leo from Larson Associates just responded and said thanks. So he got the email. So Johanna should be calling in. So crazywisdomthemovie.com. And what's interesting about Rinpoche's emergence onto the American spiritual scene is that he instituted it's like he planted the seed for crazy wisdom to proliferate throughout the spiritual landscape. And crazy wisdom is a really tricky place. It's almost like a heightened form of psychopathology or sociopathology. One could argue that Charles Manson engaged in his own brand of crazy wisdom. I don't think they're too far apart. You know, Manson I'm sure if you talk to people that were around Charlie Manson, they would say that being in his presence was like being suddenly aware of an oncoming truck. I bet you they would use the same sentence for that. It put every cell in your brain smack into the present moment. But what differentiates Charlie Manson from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche ultimately, I think, probably was the heart. And what's also interesting, and I don't believe that she gets into this, well, she doesn't get into this in the film, I watched the film, is that Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, talked about being molested in the temples in Tibet as a young boy. And this is kind of a dirty secret of the young males in Tibet. And Charlie Manson was also abused as a child. It'd be interesting to do a comparison contrast while I'm doing it, of Charlie Manson and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. But what happened is that once he planted the seed of crazy wisdom in the American spiritual landscape, then as a result, there were a number of teachers who followed suit. Osho was in some ways his own version of crazy wisdom. And there were others. There was Da Frijan. You know, these were spiritual gurus that would challenge your perception of reality in very confrontational kinds of ways. And you know, what she doesn't say about Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, or Trungpa as people just called him, is that he developed a real passion for all things Western. He loved alcohol. He loved meat. He loved women. And he had lots of lovers. He married a 16-year-old woman in the 70s in Scotland, and she was his wife all throughout his life. She had two boys with him, and they're in the film, and they are taking up his legacy. I think they're both monks. One is a little more Western than the other, it appears to be. But he had numerous lovers, and he was not. The thing about him was that was all out in the open. when you get into, some of the other spiritual teachers who had skeletons, big skeletons in their closet, like Sai Baba, Muktananda being another, they did everything on the sly. They did everything, hidden. They presented one face to the world, which was incredibly wise, incredibly enlightened, and the other face was all too human. And I talked about this before in the show when Muktananda had his, and they still have the Siddha Yoga Ashram in Oakland. And Guru Mai took over for Muktananda, and she's very popular. Not as popular as Amma, but still very popular. But Muktananda had, at Siddha Yoga, he actually had an underground passage built to his room, and adepts could go through the underground passage and pop up in his room and would not be seen going into his underground passage. And they'd pop in his room, and he would have sex with them, which was interesting because he was trying to create a community where there was celibacy. That's what he was doing. So there was a level of hypocrisy that was associated with Muktananda and a lot of teachers in that tradition. Now, they weren't crazy. They weren't part of the crazy wisdom tradition. They were much more kind of right-handed path and much more sort of orthodox or devout or whatever, based on their particular style. But Trungpa was not that at all, and he made it very clear that he was very out there with who he was and what he was doing. He made no bones about it. I would think that perhaps to some extent Da Frijan was like that as well. I mean, Da Frijan, I had a friend who was a member of the early Da Frijan, who eventually became Da Lavananda. He was Franklin Jones. Started off as Baba Frijan. He was Franklin Jones. He was a professor. He became a guru. He became an enlightened guru. And he had a place up in Clear Lake, which is not far from where I am. And they had these pools and hot tubs. And it was, my friend went there. He went from Ohio. He had a dream about him. And he went from Ohio to California. He found him. And he said it was the most incredible, ecstatic, high experience he'd ever had in his life. There would be these Dharma talks and these hot tubs, and they'd go on for hours, and they would do chicken fights with people on their shoulders, and just play. And then Da Frijan would get in, and he would figure out who everybody was, right? And he'd find out what their vulnerability was, where they had armor, and he would just pierce the armor. And he would, if you were a couple and you were dependent on each other, that he'd split you up. He'd actually assign another lover to a woman, and you had to follow the guru, right? And this is where all this stuff gets a little tricky, because part of what waking up is about breaking down your conditioning. And this is what people loved about Trungpa, was that he was able to break down people's conditioning in, for the most part, very loving ways. And he had some very interesting methodologies of doing that. He loved America. He loved Americans. He believed that America was Shambhala, that it was that place. And he believed that he could create an enlightened community and a community of Buddhas around him. This was his goal. And one could say that he was successful on some level because of the proliferation of Tibetan Buddhism as it exists today. One of the people in the film is Pema Chodron, who talks to some extent about the life of Trungpa, and does so with a sense of love and respect. But she is not that. She is the antithesis in some ways of this man. And so I think he was successful, and that he did create a spiritual community. And not only was it a national spiritual community, but he, in essence, created an international spiritual community as well, because he started off in London, and then he went to Scotland. He came to the United States, and he went from Vermont to Colorado, where he started the Naropa Institute. And he encouraged the addition of a number of different traditions at Naropa. So you would find he was very good friends with the poet Allen Ginsberg. And he was also friends with a number of other kind of American mystics or non-American mystics. D.T. Suzuki was a friend of his, the famous Zen Roshi. And what we have here in Naropa is the genesis of the kind of the transpersonal, multidisciplinary emergence of a new kind of spirituality where people were trying to find these essential truths through a number of different traditions. And one could say that this would not exist in the way that it did and has to this day without Trungpa's landing in this country. Now, there are people that will say that he was irresponsible. So when I say that, he was, how many times, does the guru have sex with his students? Does the guru indulge in substances that will ultimately bring on his demise? Does the guru become addicted to nicotine, which to some extent rules him? At what point does the guru have to answer to his own peccadillos or his own dysfunctions or his own addictions? Or are they immune to such circumspection under the guise of crazy wisdom or teaching? Are they above it? Now, if they say, well, I've never told you that I was perfect, and I clearly demonstrate to you my imperfection, wrap your head around that. Now, does that discount what I have to share with you? In some ways, it's an interesting thought because, who are you and where are you in your life? How perfect are you? And yet, I would ultimately ascribe to the notion that even though you are imperfect, you have something to share with somebody at some given moment, whether it's insight or compassion or a story, an analogy, or maybe it's something even more powerful and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Directed and conscious. So that brings up the whole notion of, are we the progenitors of wisdom in the midst of our own fallibility and vulnerability? And my answer is yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. From an astrological standpoint, I believe Chiron speaks to this. And Chiron being the wounded healer, the open wound, and that place that we can begin to operate from and through the world and not put on spiritual airs so that we can be very accessible, that we can live through our vulnerability. And if we do that on a consistent basis, then it's really empowering. It's very empowering. Now, that's not to say that we will wallow in our vulnerability or we will wallow in our inability to live in the world or to ascribe motive to people around us that keep us from being invulnerable, because that would be absolutely false. That would be disempowering, right? But I think that what Trungpa was doing was that he was living his Chiron in a very kind of enlightened way and skirting the edge. I mean, he was right on that edge all the time. There's an interesting quote from his widow in the film. And she said, I was with him for 19 years, and I'd wake up to him in the morning, and I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know who I was waking up to. She said that he was, at times somewhat predictable, but she never really knew this guy. She really never knew who he was. When you watch the film, and again, the website is crazywisdomthemovie.com, you can see some of the things that he was doing, which are kind of mind-blowing, actually. That he really thought that Americans were lazy with language. And that lazy language created a lazy being. And what he did is he gave these lectures on language. And he taught people the Queen's English, which was fascinating. You get to watch him do that. And he would do these very remedial things. He would challenge people. He would challenge people on fundamental levels of their being. And there's a scene from the movie where this guy, because this is the Vietnam War is going on around these people too, by the way, and there's a lot of aggression in the world at that time. And this guy says to him in this film, he says, Rinpoche, what do you think of aggression in the world? And he flips the question. He says, well, let's talk about the aggression in this room. And he brought it right down to not the world, but the people in the room, and the people in the room being a reflection of the world. And that was kind of what he would do. He would bring everything kind of into the moment. And this is where it gets a little weird. But at one point, he actually gets the people in the Ropa to dress up in the uniforms of the Tibetan army. Okay, I kid you not. And he led them through these exercises, these military exercises of marching and doing calisthenics and training and following orders. I mean, literally, he brought the entire community inside of the military mind to understand it, and to understand it in a way that did not make the military the other. And it was very elaborate what these people were doing. They signed off on really confronting a lot of their predispositions about the other. And he would just break them down. Very fascinating stuff. But then again, it goes off into this really crazy place. Like, what do you, how much are you going to allow the guru to do? At what point does Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche turn into Jim Jones? It's a very fine line. And I saw, a number of people begin to emerge in the 70s and 80s and even 90s with this kind of psychopathic mentality towards spirituality. And I had an experience of that in the 90s when I was part of this psychedelic journey group. I'm not sure if I've told this story before. If I haven't told it, I'll tell it now as we wait for Johanna Dimitrakis. Hopefully she'll be on the film, on the show here. So I had this experience back in the 90s where I was with this woman, and she was and we wound up becoming lovers, and she was part of this psychedelic journey group. But at that time, it was all very seductive. This whole relationship with things like mushrooms and LSD and ketamine. It was all bubbling up to the surface, and in the background was the San Francisco rave scene, and people like Terence McKenna were emerging. People were rediscovering John Lilly, things like that. And I was kind of, in the heart of it. And it was a big part of my life. And I met this woman, and she was part of a psychedelic journey group that was up in Sebastopol. And it was being run by this guy who was, he was a shaman. He'd studied with Salvador Roquette, who had studied with Maria Sabena, who was the person who turned Aldous Huxley onto mushrooms, peyote, mescaline. And he was partially blind, and he had set up this community of people, and what they would do is they would do these really deep journeys. And when I say deep, we're talking 5-6 hour journeys. And it would involve copious amounts of psychedelics. So I went up there, and I decided to experience this. And I met this guy on a couple of occasions, and he was kind of interesting, in his own way. And he was part Mexican and part Native American, so he had he was a member of the Native American Church, so he could dispense mushrooms and peyote as part of a religious ceremony. He was married to a non-Native woman. And how they worked this thing out was that he was the leader, he was the shaman, right? He was the guy that would hold the focus, and his wife would be in the back room, and she had a multi-track stereo system set up with all these speakers around the room. And she would play music while everybody was in the midst of their psychedelic journey. So, the whole format was you would wear these eye masks, right? But before you wear the eye mask, you black everything out, sit down, and you bring out an enormous bowl of mushrooms. And then your portion was actually already allotted to you. They'd have a little bit more on the side. And it was all based on your height and weight. And they gave you a banana just in case you were a little nauseous. So, first thing in the morning, I got a bowl of mushrooms for breakfast. So I'm eating these things. And I wind up getting incredibly high, right? Really high. And higher than I've ever been in my life because of the amount of, at least on mushrooms, right? And I'm having this experience, and the eye patch is on. I'm getting nothing but these internal visuals. And there's speakers all around the room, and there's this multi-track thing going on, and the music's going back and forth, left and right. And I'm finally starting to get it. Right? I'm starting to land in this space. And somebody taps me on my shoulder. Says, Robert, open your mouth. I'm like, okay. Where are we going to go next? And the next thing I know, he drops 2 hits of lysergic acid dithylamide underneath my tongue. And at that point, I just had this conscious realization that I've just taken, more psychedelic substance than I've ever had in my life. And, oh, by the way, I'm wearing these patches over my eyes, so I can't see, at least externally. And trust me, where I went from there, and while you're going through the ego death, which invariably these substances bring on, and pretty gripping ego death, by the way. His wife is in the back room, literally mixing up tracks that are designed to make you insane. I'm not kidding you. So while you're losing your mind, the music is encouraging you to lose your mind. And I'm thinking, well, this is how Charlie Manson started, right? I mean, in his own way, right? But I'm in this place now where I'm like, where am I? How did I get here? And how far am I going to let this go? My control mechanisms kicked in, right? And at one point, really at the peak, I just wanted to leave. And I finally surrendered, and I had my experience, and it was fine. And at the end of this thing, we're all sitting around. We take the blindfolds off, and we're all still just cooking. And there was this Brazilian guy that was part of the journey, and the guy who was running this thing was debriefing everyone, trying to figure out what they got out of it. And the Brazilian guy was kind of rambling. He's going on and on about how when somebody put that thing in his mouth, it dropped, and he was here, he was there, obviously he did not get the experience. And he kept rambling on and on and on and on. And it was actually getting hard to listen to him because he tried to be compassionate in those places. Wow, what did he go through? Did he confront something? Was he brave? All these things pop into your head, and you're trying to not be judgmental, hold the space. Like, hey, I was there with you. Maybe we can hold the space for you so you can come to some realization of some sort, right? Meanwhile, he's droning on and on and on. And this guy says to him, he says, you're living on the edge. You're living on the edge. You're living on the edge of life and death. So do you want to live or do you want to die? And the guy didn't really sing. He says, I'll tell you what I can do right now. He says, I can complete your journey for you right now. He said, all we have to do is just give you a shot of ketamine and we'll complete your journey. And what do you want to do? And the guy was indecisive. He was on that fence. I mean, he had seen that he was on that fence, right? And here's where the crazy wisdom kicks in. He makes a judgment call that this guy needs that shot of ketamine, that he's going to take responsibility for his spiritual evolution. And so he hits him. He hits him with the ketamine. And then what I saw after that, I'll never forget. This guy, the Brazilian guy, reverted into a proto-human. I kid you not. He was pre-human. And he let out a primal scream that is still ringing in my ears to this day. And then after he let out this primal scream, he collapsed in a heap. And he started sobbing. And then he crawled on all fours to this guy's feet. And he was just sobbing and repeating words over and over again in Portuguese. And this guy who was the head, of course, was part Spanish and understood Portuguese through Spanish. And people asked him, hey, what's he saying? And he said, oh, he's thanking me. He's thanking me. He's calling me God or something like that. I'm like, wow, that's a heavy trip. You've just shot this guy with ketamine. And now he's calling you God. And I saw what happened with this ketamine experience. And I'm thinking to myself, if he asks me how my trip was, I'm fine. I had a great trip. You don't need to do anything based on what I just saw. So what happened was, as he burns time for the film director to come on the show, what happened was that I thought about this whole experience, right? And I was going to try it again because that ketamine trip, the ketamine phase was part of this experience. And I didn't get it the first time. I was thinking about going up again and trying again and going further, right? I'm into exploring. But I thought to myself, this whole thing with, in the middle of the trip, right? Somebody asking you to open your mouth. I thought to myself, well, that takes an incredible amount of trust. I mean, what if they just decided to wipe everybody out, And this is all Heaven's Gate, Marshall Applewhite kind of shit. And I thought to myself, well, I have to say no at some point. I have to say no. Because I have to have volition. It has to be my will. I have to come to some informed level of choice. And then maybe the third time around, it's like, yeah, I said no. I got through my adolescent phase. I was very innocent the first time. I was like a child. My second time, I had to rebel. I had to push back and say no. So I did. I went up. They came up to me. Robert, open your mouth, please. No. Robert, open your mouth. No. And I did this. I did this for a reason. What happened was that when I did that, it kind of broke the spell. it was like all of a sudden I was kind of on the outside with these people. It was an interesting choice to make. And then I began to see things just a little bit differently. And the woman that I was with during this time, she was always going up there. She was always going up to this house. And I was getting, I was like, why do you go up there? Why do you spend so much time there? She helps out with the cleaning. It was a community, right? And it was I don't want to say his name. It was this guy at the center of this community. And I asked her, and I said point blank to her one day, I said, are you fucking so-and-so? And she said, oh, no. We have a special relationship. By the way, special relationship is a word that's used in this film at one point, the Crazy Wisdom film. So I was listening. So, special relationship. Okay. So I wound up breaking up with this person, and I drifted away from that community because of that one decision to say no. And then it must have been probably about 2 years later. I think it was 1996. And Timothy Leary had just died. And I was at Grace Cathedral, and it was a big memorial for Tim Leary. And I ran into two people who were part of this community. I recognized them. They recognized me. And they told me what had happened with this community. And it turns out that the leader of the community was having sex with about half of the members, the women. And if the boyfriends or the husbands asked, are you having sex with so-and-so, they were told to say, no, we just have a special relationship. And the problem with all this is that, again, it was all behind closed doors. And he couldn't even, when it all went down, there were a bunch of people that wanted to confront him. And it fractured the community, it tore the community in half. And he had basically fundamentally violated their trust. But half of the community was so entranced with him and their experience, and they didn't want to give it up, that they rallied around him and they became his talking heads. So ultimately what happened was that the community sort of died down, a few core members, and then he passed away. And I'm sharing this story with you because there's a very fine line between crazy wisdom and manipulation. Manipulation in the guise of truth. And it's very seductive for people who have a spiritual penchant or a spiritual directive and have not learned to deal with their hungers or their desires or their appetites, because then it can get really mixed up and it can get quite confusing. And what looks like a sacrament really is an addiction. What looks like a tool for teaching is really some form of sophisticated manipulation. Now, there are people who have had encounters with a number of American gurus, non-American gurus, who have experienced both heaven and hell, and they've experienced both the profundity and the deliberate manipulation. And it's worked for them. Okay, we might be joined here by Johanna Dimitrakis, the director of Crazy Wisdom. Let's just see who's shown up here in the queue, waiting to talk with me and the millions of people currently listening to the show. Hello, is this Johanna? Hello? Yeah, hi. Who's this? Hello?
Oh, I'm just listening in.
Okay, all right. Let me put you back on hold, okay?
All right, thanks.
All right, no worries. So let's see. Let's put him back on hold here. Let's mute. Do the mute. All right, mute. Here we go. And all right, we're in mute mode. So there we are, And if you haven't, look, I even got into a place in my life in the 90s. I saw myself as a proponent of crazy wisdom. And at times, I kind of was. But at other times, I was just being fucking irresponsible. And it's a really dangerous path. It's a path of obliteration, really. And what's fascinating about Trungpa and Tibetan Buddhism in general is that the goal, theoretically, is to pass through desire. And he certainly encountered the bulk of his desires here in the modern Shambhala, where you could really get everything and anything. I mean, if you think about it, during the 70s and the 80s, he didn't, I think he passed away at 87? When you go through, during that time, everything was available here. I mean, everything. Foods had pesticides, but they weren't genetically modified. All the best drugs in the world were here at that time. Beautiful women, money. There was a lot of money. There was a lot of available money, floating around America. So this was, in some ways, the material equivalent of Shambhala. And he'd found it, but I don't think he completely transcended. And look, I'm on the outside, and there are people that to this day are devoted to this man, lovingly devoted to this man. People were breaking down in tears talking about his life and the impact he had on them. So I'm not going to discount his, but it's a very, very slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope, and not everybody can handle it. Not everybody can handle because what you're doing is you're dancing in duality. You're dancing in dual consciousness with the ultimate goal of weaving it all together so that there is a understanding or gnosis or cognition of unity consciousness. In the meantime, there's this consistent cleaving and breaking away of your conditioning throughout the experience. I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of like the DNA, the spiral of the DNA, the dual dance of the DNA, and weaving through the DNA so that you arrive at some form of unity consciousness. But the twists and the turns and the peril, not only to the student, but to the teacher. I mean, there's great peril to him, I believe. Because at that point, you're taking on, theoretically, the karma of everybody's life that you're working with. You're taking that on. And if you believe in karma and you believe in reincarnation, then think about the consequences of that in, further incarnations down the line. That's what happens. You've got to kind of work that out. So he took on a lot. It's a fascinating movie, and I believe it's out on DVD now. And you can again go to crazywisdommovie.com. If you've seen Apocalypse Now, Kurtz, as portrayed by Marlon Brando, is the Western version of Crazy Wisdom. And that's who he is. He's doing everything. I mean, you could probably, again, pull pieces out of that movie and ascribe them to Trungpa. And that is the thrust, the archetypal expression of Brando. And Brando did everything in that movie kind of live. It was unscripted. And everything that came out of his brain was unscripted. And there's a scene in Crazy Wisdom where Allen Ginsberg asks him about the potential of jazz, the potential of blues, the potential of rock. And he said, yes, there is potential in jazz, because jazz is open. Jazz has space. Yes, there is potential in blues. He says, no, there's not much potential in rock. And then they get into this thing around poetry. And Ginsberg was having problems writing. He encountered a block. And Trungpa says, well, why do you even have to write? He said, why aren't you like Milarepa? Why don't you just stand up and just trust your mind? And that kind of experience is what Brando was engaged in Apocalypse Now. That kind of spontaneous utterances of script and text. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some music, and I'm going to hang out in the chat room, and I'm going to stop talking for a while. And then we're going to go into the final phase of the show, and hopefully we can get Johanna on here. So what do I want to play? It's funny, I played that Woody Guthrie song on the 4th of July, and of course, YouTube figured that out. So why don't I play, let's see. I'm just going to play Great Big Water by Alma Desnuda. And I'll be back in 5 minutes and 5 seconds, and hopefully we'll have Johanna on, and we'll see where this goes. All right, you're listening to the Friday FARCast. I'm Robert Phoenix. We're exploring crazy wisdom and its impact on the modern American spiritual landscape.
You know, I used to stumble around and I'd wonder why, questioning the moon, the stars, the sky. And then I saw the truth, all this pain was just in my head. I thought I better stop living, 'cause soon I just might be dead. And oh, a great big water flooded me. I became just another drop in the big gigantic sea. And through all this pain, confusion, I did slip, and my soul felt lighter, so I thought I'd write this funky ass riff. The next step, oh well, I took it logically, was to share my thoughts, my life philosophy. But not all of the people wanted me to speak. They wanted the safety and the comfort of their negativity. And then I read the words of Mr. Gandhi. Change in the world you want to see. And so I closed my mouth and I tried to live the truth. And so it was a whole lot harder than preaching from a preacher's booth. Oh, a great big water flooded me. True, it might be drops, but ripple through infinity. If ever you should forget this and start to trip, just listen to this message while we drop our funky riff. this message while we drop our funky riff. Listen to this message while we drop our funky riff. Listen to this message while we drop our funky riff.
Okay, I just got a message from the point person who's dealing with publicity for Johanna Dimitrakis, and we're going to have to reschedule her for next week. She'll be on next Friday, and we'll get into the film with her more next Friday. Also, I believe next Friday we're going to have Sonia Grace and Eagle Spirit on. So, it'll be an interesting show, and we're going to talk about spirituality in modern America, and it'll be an interesting riff for sure. So now I am taxed with 30 minutes of open content. So let me just throw the number out there, 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995. And if you feel like calling in and want to talk, you can maybe give your experiences around crazy wisdom, or where you have been manipulated by somebody on a spiritual level, thinking that you were getting something that was insightful, wise, and profound, and really all you got was hurt. It's an interesting topic. It's happened to all of us. And it falls under the rubric of betrayal, which is one of the most ancient wounds that we have on this planet. So I'm going to throw that out there, and if you want to talk about it, 347-308-8995. Looks like we have a caller here, LNR99. Hello, LNR99.
Hello, Robert. When I was getting onto Skype, I missed what you said, so I'm sorry. I didn't hear what kind of questions you were entertaining.
Well, the question I put out there, Ellen, was, has anybody, and I guess, that includes you, had an experience in your life where you surrendered your will, and in the process you thought that you were learning something of spiritual import or value, either from a teacher or an individual in your life that was like a teacher, and that ultimately wound up feeling betrayed or empty or broken as a result of some form of surrender in a way that really wasn't perhaps appropriate, or might have been appropriate to learn about betrayal in humanity. So I just threw that out there as a question, and you popped in. So has that ever happened to you?
No, I have a real issue with surrender, and it's something I've been learning. And it's something I've been giving a lot of thought to this year, because I'm one of these people, very strong-willed. I don't think I like to be in control of everything, but I don't surrender over to others very easily. So I'm on the opposite side. I have to learn what surrender is. My problem is not surrendering to the wrong guru or philosophy. So maybe I should just call back another time.
No, I think it's an interesting dialogue. No, so if you're open to it, we can explore that. So I think people need to be able to hold on to a sense of self, because it's a very precious thing at times. You don't want it to be violated. You don't want, every individual's flame is very important, and it can get snuffed out. And so I understand the hesitance to not surrender and to pull back. But there is a time where, and especially it seems, Ellen, in relationship, when you develop feelings for a person, you enter into this field of love, where in order to really experience that fully, that you do have to surrender. And that when you do surrender, you allow a certain intimacy to come in and really move you and change you, and you dance in that field. But it's a big leap, and it's a leap of faith, and I think that that's what surrender ultimately becomes.
Yes, but I do think that there's a difference in the surrender in a relationship, in a personal relationship like that, and a surrender to a spiritual philosophy or guru. also have problems. What constitutes like surrender? For example, even in a relationship, I think I got lost in relationships. But when I look back, it wasn't a true surrender. It was like, well, I'm not quite sure how to get into this, but in hindsight, I would not say it was a true surrender. It was more of like fear of talking up and talking out. And those are two different things.
Yeah.
Fear of speaking up for oneself, it's fear. It's not a surrender. It's not saying, the divine will knows. It's just basic fear.
So would you describe yourself as a spiritually oriented person?
These days I would not have 10 years ago.
And what is your practice like? How do you stay in touch with that, or how do you practice it on a day-to-day level?
Well, my philosophy is based on a oneness. I've come to this slowly. So my spiritual practice is recognizing the oneness. And this includes being out in nature and really appreciating nature. It means engaging with people and seeing their humanity. I've been doing very different work from what I used to do. And it means I engage with different people on a different level. And I think that's been part of my journey. It was part of a forced learning. But I've learned to see our oneness and humanity in reaching out to so many different people. So I consider that my spiritual practice.
Well, I think that's a very fundamental and very essential spiritual practice, because it seems that one of the things that we want to be able to do, at least I'm interested in it, is to be able to open up and to experience this breadth of humanity and to stay in touch with that humanity. And people say, well, humanity, that's not a very spiritual experience. Well, no, it's the most spiritual experience we can have, is to feel, is to emote, is to feel for another, is to excel and succeed and fail, and all these things, that we've been taught in some ways are inferior, and that we've been given these pathways that are supposedly there to lead us towards some form of unattainable perfection.
Yeah, no, spirituality is not found in a church. It's found in connecting with others. That's why we're here. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
I would agree with that. So you were part of, you had one job, and now you're doing another kind of job. Was this something of your own volition, or did you have to change your career as far as being able to make money and be in the world?
I changed careers. I left what I was doing because I was severely unhappy in it. I was like really, really clinically depressed. And it's been hard for me to get back on my feet in another career that pays the bills.
Sure.
So I've been doing all kinds of things. So it's not like just one job. It's like several volunteer things, some paying jobs, some, everything I can. And again, it's exposed me to so many more things than I would have seen otherwise. And in some respects, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, life in the post-economy is interesting because it's non-linear. People used to be on a career track or a career path, and that's not happening now.
No, it's not.
And so in a lot of ways, what it's done is it's taken us out of linear time to some extent. And so we're experiencing different parts of ourselves in these different pockets, or these jobs that we have to do in order to make ends meet. And while it's exhausting on some level, it would be nice to just ball it all up and have one thing. It is what it is, and it's what we have now. And I think it's interesting because if we're multidimensional, or if we're running, say, a program that allows us to maximize sort of I'm not a big karma person, but the most sort of karma, or the most spiritual agreements that we have with each other, then having these kind of multiple career paths kind of accelerates that. And so now we're hitting on different aspects of ourselves at multiple levels at the same time that we would not have had if we were just really on that one linear career path. And so, we're multitasking, we're multidimensionally multitasking, and that's kind of how I see it. And, can we bring it all back together and have, an integrated, synergistic expression of all these different things? That has to be determined, because a lot of this is also going to be based on kind of what happens with the economy in general. And we all know that, for the most part, it's not coming back the way it was.
Oh,
so
no,
we're
not.
So we're going to have to figure this out now and really reintegrate at a much more refined level. So, props to you for being able to do that. And I guess you kind of had to surrender to that process, right?
Yes, I still have bouts of, worry, stress, and so forth. But a part of me sees some kind of divine plan in all this and what I'm supposed to be learning. It hurts, but I do see a plan involved. I just wish the learning came a little bit easier.
Yeah, I hear you. What do you do, Ellen, when you get into a place where your faith is really challenged? What do you do?
Cry.
Right.
I wish I could say something else, but that's it. I cry, I pray.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I think that's really kind of the rubber hitting the road moment. Because I think people can mostly manage and handle up to a point, and each of us has, our breaking point, and where we just can't do anymore. And I think in those moments, that's where our faith is supremely challenged. And then we literally have to go inside of ourselves to find some other, venue or some, for lack of a better term, higher power or God.
Yeah.
And connect with that and let it go. I mean, there's just, we can't carry the burden, all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Alan, where are you calling from, just out of curiosity?
Oh, New York.
That's what I thought. I felt New York there. All right. Was there anything else you'd like to share with us today, or anything else you want to?
No. What an interesting topic. But I know you normally do astrology. So how does this relate to what's going on astrologically?
Well, that's a good question. Astrologically, we just moved into Mars has just moved into Libra, and it's moved out of Virgo. And Mars was in Virgo for I think about 9 months. And during Mars in Virgo, there was a lot of, I think people had the opportunity to kind of get their shit together, either go on a diet or exercise or begin to find work that might be more appropriate, more meaningful, might bring more money in. Mars is all about action and will, and Virgo is all about the details and working hard to keep the details together, keep one's life details together. That's changed now. That's shifted. And Mars is in Libra. And it's a very different energy. It's moved away from the self and out to the other, Libra being relationship. So we're now dealing with this energy where we want to partner with people. If we don't want to partner with people, we want to end things with people. There's going to be a real clamor here over the next few weeks, especially as Mars, really in the next few days, as Mars begins to oppose Uranus and begins to square Pluto, is going to be part of this T-square. People are going to be very cognizant and aware, and they're going to want some form of what I would call social retribution, or some form of standing up for one's rights. Like, if this heat wave continues, you're going to see a lot of pissed off people in the United States, wondering why they can't get their power turned back on. We're going to see more of a sense of urgency around people basically saying, I've had enough. This is Mars in Libra. And on an individual level, you'll look around at people in your life. And I just had this experience with a friend of mine a couple days ago. She invited some people over to a house that she's house sitting at. Very nice house. And these people got sloppy. They did things that, were not necessarily terrible, but they weren't very conscious either. and they'd been drinking a little bit during the day. They had some beer, some wine, and they were not really good guests. And it left her with a sense of, you know what, I'm tired of this shit. I need to call people out on their being sloppy in their life or in my life. And that's a Mars and Libra kind of moment. I think people are going to look around and say, you know what, I've had quite enough of this, thank you. Either you show up in a way that is clear and conscious and aware, or, just go show up in somebody else's life. I mean, that's kind of the energy that we're dealing with. Mars and Libra can be quite argumentative if it doesn't have a point of access to be able to redress, quote-unquote, wrongs or bring balance into a situation. Because Mars and Libra has an urgency to achieve balance. And that is now a collective experience, and it's going to get very intense with the opposition between Uranus and Aries and Mars and Libra. One wants radical peace, the other wants radical will and radical action. Or one wants the marshaling the forces of peace, and the other wants radical action. And those two forces are opposing each other, and split right down the middle is Pluto and Capricorn, which is the plutocracy, which is the oligarchy, which is not the 1%, but the 0.5%. It's the Monsantos, it's the Goldman Sachses, it's the Department of Homeland Security. That's what Pluto and Capricorn is. And now you've got these forces that are coming in and squaring them and opposing each other. And I think over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to see some very intense activity on the American landscape here in this country. In the world, over the course of the last 2 years, obviously, we've been seeing a lot of protests taking place in Europe. Those are going to continue. And I think we're going to see even more protests evolve in places like Japan. Recently, in Fukushima, they had, or in Tokyo, they had people, they had literally hundreds of thousands of people marching against nuclear power. And we didn't see that.
No.
We did not see that. And we're going to see, it's going to be hard at some point to deny that with Mars opposing Uranus. Because Uranus is, it rules Aquarius, and Aquarius is the modern media. It's the internet, it is television. And Mars and Libra is going to be opposing. It's going to be so Uranus and Aries is going to have to pay attention. One of the things that's happening on Monday is that the FBI is going to shut down a bunch of servers. Ooh. And it's because they think that these servers have been corrupted. So how is this going to impact people? This is part of the manifestation of this T-square, and we're going to see this happen over the course of the next few weeks. I think things are going to get hot. I think things are going to get heavy, and I think we're going to see the beginnings of, I wouldn't say a revolution. I think that's a little heavy, but I think we're going to see a level of protest in a way that we haven't seen even during the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement, which I think was mostly astroturfed, by the way, we're going to see something very different begin to emerge. And I think that's coming as we approach this T-square with Mars. I think it's a very powerful T-square. So, in your own life, what do? In your own life, you stand up for your own rights. You stand up for your own, desire to have a balanced and integrated and equal and whole relationship with all things.
Wow. Well, let me give you some insight into what might happen in New York.
Okay.
Con Ed is the public utility here, electric utilities. They locked out the workers in a contract dispute about a couple of days ago.
Oh, wow.
And think about this. We already are having brownouts in parts of town because it's so hot.
Yeah.
You have a blackout here, and you don't have the workers to come here and fix things. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
There's already one big, they're using managers to do the work that the workers normally would do, and they're not able to do it. There was an accident the other day where somebody got burned badly because, the manager doesn't know what he's doing. He probably hasn't been on the line in ages.
Yeah.
So anyway, it would not surprise me if we see something big and bad happen because of that here in New York.
Yeah. Well, that would certainly be emblematic of the T-square, right? Because Mars on Libra is rights, it's negotiations, and Uranus in Aries is power, man. It's immediate, right? I mean, you flip on a switch, theoretically, you get power, and then Pluto in Capricorn is, the ruling bodies. It's the people who make the decisions, and who decide, well, we're going to lock these people out and try to scale their contracts down and, make sure that they get less on the back end of their retirements and things like that. And that's kind of where we are right now. And that sounds very plausible. We definitely need some meteorological relief in this country. That's one level. That's one expression, is potential riot and conflict. But also, cattle ranchers in the middle of the country are having a very hard time keeping their herds alive. So this is very serious, and it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds, to say the least.
Well, great. And thank you for talking to me, Robert. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Well, thank you for calling in, Ellen. Take good care of yourself, all right?
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so there we go. We got a caller. That was nice. The thing I love about bringing callers on is that I think people are amazing sources of information and wisdom, and they can be great guests in and of themselves. If you tap into them. We just learned something from Ellen about what's happening in New York City. Okay, so it is 11:50 here in California. Next week, Monday, I'm trying to get another filmmaker on, and it's a fellow who's done a documentary about the tornadoes in Joplin, Missouri, and George Norrie is he's the narrator of the film, and so we're trying to get the filmmaker on, and also George. So George Norrie might be on my show on Monday. Here's a 610. Let's find out who's there and what they want to talk about. Hey, you're on the air with Robert. Also George.
Yes, hi, Robert. How are you?
I'm fine. Could you turn your computer?
Yeah, I just did. Yeah.
Thanks.
They said I was there was someone else in the queue, so I was surprised that you picked up so quickly.
No, you went to the top of the list.
Oh.
Right? Number one.
Well, I've called in a few times before, but I just wanted to say that I think what makes your show so wonderful is that you're probably one of the best listeners, even though you have a radio show. You're a fantastic listener, and I think that's rare in people, and I think it's very rare in men. So I just wanted to say that.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said you're a wonderful...
No, I'm just kidding. It was a joke. Yeah.
Oh, God. So...
well, thank you. I appreciate it.
No, you have a genuine interest in people, and it comes across.
I do. No, I find people fascinating. I've always found people fascinating.
And I think your son is very lucky to have you as a father also.
Oh. Well, I'm lucky to have him as a son.
Yeah.
He's a kick in the pants, this kid. Let me tell you. He trips me out sometimes in a good way.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, where are you calling from?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. And is it like crazy hot back there?
It has been for the last week. Today we're getting a bit of a break with the humidity. It's still in the 90s, but it's pretty pleasant today.
Oh, good.
But 4th of July it was like over 100, 90% humidity. Yeah. So, I guess what I wanted to ask you is, I know you've been talking about the droughts and so forth. I mean, what do you feel about these forest fires out west? Do you think they're, I don't know, there's a few things on the alternative sites mentioning that they feel that they're rather suspicious looking in that surrounding trees and grass around these homes they're still green, and the homes are pulverized with like a white ash. Did you see that at all anywhere? Or?
No, I haven't seen it, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'd heard that some of the fires have been started by these lightning strikes without any rain, and I have seen pictures, and these homes look like they were just absolutely reduced to rubble, like an atomic flash.
Right,
yeah.
And that's when they showed. I think they showed some photos of ones like in California, some forest fires, and the surrounding vegetation was affected. But in these cases, you would see the chimney columns still up,
right.
in a house. Because a lot of these were mansions that they're showing in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And what they're showing is that everything is just completely like ash, except that the surrounding vegetation is not affected, which looks almost like a nuclear blast. But I suppose if there's no fallout, then that can't be the case. It must be something else. But it seems rather suspicious. I mean, at first you could say, okay, arson, and who would do that, or it's negligence, or it's just the fact of the drought, and it was just became unmanageable. But I don't know. It's just.
Well, I think that most fires are as a result of arson. I think they're deliberate, and certainly. When we look at this through the lens of something like Agenda 21 and moving people off properties, reclaiming property, like, with the fellow that we're going to have on Monday, and we're going to talk about the floods in Joplin, they're not going to rebuild Joplin that way. Mm-hmm. They're not. I mean, that city, as we know, is pretty much going to go away. And we're seeing this in cities.
Well, that's what happened with New Orleans, too. I mean, at least in the poor sections, they weren't going to plan to rebuild those areas, certainly.
Absolutely. And so what we're seeing is sort of this, managed in some ways decimation of population centers throughout the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And where do people go, right? Well, people have to go live somewhere, and they have to go to, designated population centers or things along those lines. So this really kind of falls in alignment with the Agenda 21 experience. And
what's interesting about these one areas of Colorado Springs, though, they were very wealthy areas, which, doesn't really add up to, what some of the, like you say, places, some of the middle-class places, populations or areas like of New Orleans, which were poor. So it's almost, that's a little kind of disturbing because you don't know, what that was about. But
right. Well, if you take it into account, and let's consider, perhaps a darker, agenda around this. Well, maybe they're just moving up the ladder. Maybe they're going higher and higher. Which wouldn't necessarily surprise me on some level. I think also they had that water tanker, the airplane that crashed. That's also kind of a big story as well. Here they are, trying to fight these fires, and this plane goes down. And that's pretty rare. It's rare when an air tanker, fighting fires actually, crashes. It does happen, but it's pretty rare, And so what was about that? What was going on with that?
Yeah, and then they talked about meteors too going over.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We live in absolutely and utterly bizarre times. We don't know. We don't know where the next thing is going to come from or what it's going to look like, but we know that it does happen, and sometimes it looks quote unquote natural, or it looks like an accident, and in many cases it really isn't. And then we've got London. We're staring down the London Olympics. That starts on the 27th. Right. And, that is just a freak show of epic proportion. They've got anti-missile towers all around the city. They've got missiles. They've got missiles, stationed on rooftops around the city of London. It's like it's a war. It's like wartime.
Well, just the stadium construction alone is odd. Very odd.
Absolutely.
They have pyramid-shaped lights and... Oh,
absolutely.
And the sculpture that they designed.
It's an Illuminati, mind fuck.
Right, and and in our face too.
Yeah, we're going to transition out of here real quick, but I do want to say this: the opening ceremonies are being directed by Danny Boyle, who is the director of Slumdog Millionaire. And I've looked at it. You can go online and look at the photos. The theme for the opening ceremonies is England's Dark Satanic Mills, which is a poem by William Blake. And inside of Wembley Stadium, they have, you got to see the pictures online. It looks like London. It looks like the face of a planet after a bomb dropped, and has all these markings of the industrial era, but a tower posing as an obelisk. The path of the athletes walking through the stadium looks like a snake cutting through the center of the world. It's bizarre stuff, truly bizarre. Well,
it just seems that since the start of the year, all of the things that are, I mean, they do put things out there, but a lot of people aren't astute enough to pick up on it. It seems to me that between the Academy Awards and the Grammys and
Super Bowl,
it's just in your face. So, what about that Olympian boy that went missing in London too? Did you hear about that?
I have not heard about that.
Yeah, and he was young. He was a teenager, and he just went out one afternoon, and then they didn't know what happened to him, which was a little strange too. So, well,
yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff. So right now we're going over the time for the show. We're in the
right now. If I go, I'll look up Danny Boyle, and then I'll see what you were referring to.
Yeah, but real quick, I mean, people are going to hear this anyway, so we may as well just finish these thoughts out now. But what was really interesting about the Olympics is that they have included this guy named Oscar Pistorius into the Olympics. And Oscar Pistorius is a double amputee, and he has these extensions on his legs that allow him to run very fast. And he's going to compete for Brazil in the 400-meter relay. And essentially what he is a transhumanist symbol. He's a symbol of transhumanism.
Right.
The altered man. And it's the first time they've ever let anybody like this in the Olympics. And his nickname is Blade Runner, which I think is very, very fascinating.
Yeah.
So here we go. This is the celebration of the synthetic man or the augmented man. We're moving from natural man to the future man, which is the robots or the android.
Right.
And Oscar Pistorius is the symbol of that, and they just let him at the end. He was not allowed to compete in China, by the way, but the London Olympics is allowing him to compete. So there you go.
And also something about that girl Jones, that they're kind of advertising her as a 29-year-old virgin.
The festal virgin,
yeah.
Lolo Jones. Yeah, Lolo Jones actually has her birthday during the Olympics. Okay,
very dangerous.
August 5th, and that is the day that she is supposed to be in the qualifying heat for the 100-meter hurdles, which is her race.
Right.
Think about that. That is her solar return that day.
Dangerous.
And she also has Saturn right on her Pluto on that day as well, which is not an insignificant event. So, people are linking Lolo Jones to Tim Tebow. Everybody's trying to hook them up, like these two virgins, right? People are trying to match make them. Like, wouldn't they be a perfect match? They're both Christians and both virgins. And I said to a friend of mine who sent me the Lolo Jones material, I said, you know what Tim Tebow should do? Tim Tebow should file Lolo Jones before the Olympics starts so that they can put a wrench in their plans.
Exactly.
That would be the most loving and inspired thing Tim Tebow could do with his life. Okay, well, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, thanks for your writing. Thanks for your show. World's a better place for you, Robert, with you in it, Robert.
Well, it's a better place for me when I'm able to do this, trust me. Because if I didn't, I'd go fucking nuts, I'm sure. So this is partially my therapy too. So. Yeah,
and I think you're a therapist for other people too, in a loving way, and you just have a really you're a wonderful writer, but you're just a great communicator. I mean, I love your writing, but also when you have your blog show, it's like I say, you're a great listener and you make people feel that you care about them. So.
Well, right on, and stay cool. All right.
You too, hon. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay, so we got a late start, but we made up. We made up for lost ground today. So anyway, thank you everyone for listening. It's been a great show. This is how we do it. We get down here and when we have a guest, we free associate. That's how it happens. Okay. Thanks for everyone for listening and calling in. Try to stay cool over the weekend. If you're listening to this now, you're listening to it on the podcast. Use your head to discern what's real and your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and have a great weekend.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words, I submit that these impressions are valid and significant. And I will even say this, such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.